That's why I'm like, but
I don't know, it's just weird, because I didn't notice much of a drastic volume difference with the mic in or out, you know?
The presenter?
No.
start at one.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, there should be two other ones.
The handheld, which is right there.
Should be,
And then there's like a clip-on one.
small, you know, like on your collar. So that's your cable.
The time of the
XL one.
computer is long.
Goes in, that also
Oh,
goes in
yeah.
battery. I don't know if that
That's
would
right.
be better, but you have a cable. You couldn't run it to the podium, but maybe you could hook it to the, padcaster. I'm sure it does. If the other one does, it has to.
This is a beautiful building.
Yeah, it's relatively new. It has like 4 years.
Oh, is it? Nice. So the college is
try
really
with that?
spread out over like whole
The only thing is, I don't, yeah,
No,
that's the only problem.
there are 4 sections. There's the South Campus, if you go to the right,
Okay.
down, which is engineering and communications.
Oh, but then
we
we're
have
carrying
the
two.
main
Well,
campus,
I could just put it up
which
there.
is to the left.
That's not long
and
enough.
it's where business, liberal arts, president's offices, cafeterias, other two housing. So the main campus is to the left.
How are you supposed to plug this in? Oh, do you... Where'd you put the adapter?
That's ours. Oh, I think I put it either in your bag or mine. Probably this thing I put it in mine. Yeah. I just didn't want it floating around. I don't know, it's just weird. The setting. Let's read this.
United Nations, PRME,
It's tough. It's like almost perfectly designed, but not quite, you know? It like looks really good, and then when you start to plug it in, it's like, oh wow, actually this is a challenge.
Hello? Can you guys hear me now? This is a test. Hello? Hello? Does this sound any better? Hello? Hello, hello? Okay. Do I sound a lot better or kind of sort of better? Do you think, Greg, do we have any of extensions for these? Because we could just run it and leave it on top of the... You want to try that?
Just walk with me.
Oh, even just on here.
Just walk with me, see if we can get it to Rich's level. I just want to see how far
Because I could even put it like this. So I'm going to do a test here and a test on that. This is another test. This is an audio test. Just want to see what happens with this audio test here. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. another test with it over here. This is the audio test with the microphone on the table. Audio test, microphone on table, going now.
Oh, so you could mount it onto the.
Why don't we try that? Sure.
Oh, it takes the audio. So what I'll do is I'll get rid of this.
That'd be quicker to just turn it.
Yeah, you gotta unscrew it.
No, but I'm saying like if you just whatever that's.
You really had it on there, huh? Alright, and then you can adjust it from there. So, like that. Alright.
Oh, that worked.
And then that's your adjuster. Same effect.
I
Just
guess try to point it at the mic maybe?
up. Yeah.
Testing. This time we have mic. Trying to see what happens. Hopefully you can hear me. Is that better or? It's better with the other one. Which makes sense, because the other one's, whatchamacallit? Oh, this one? It was really good. Yeah, but I don't know if they have the
They're
whole
all really good if you're right on top of them. Any kind of distance and they suck, which is kind of annoying. Yeah, I thought they would have picked up better.
I think it's too late to get it now. We should go back to
It's
the
7
other one.
minutes. Oh, you want to go back?
Well, yeah, this one, they said the other one was. How did you get this on? Am I turning the wrong way, right?
Yeah, left. You're going tight. Or you could do that, yeah. And then
Oh, it's working now. Do you think this is good or should we turn it up? Probably not going to make a difference, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I didn't personally notice much change in that one. I
We
know
don't-
Jake had it aimed right at the speaker.
And we don't know what this does.
Yeah, I don't know what that does either.
So we'll just leave it on with 10 distance.
I guess so. Yeah. I know last time Jake had it aimed right at the speaker. He didn't have it aimed like up at a speaker or down.
Gotcha.
Or anything like that. But when there was live streaming anyway.
Testing. That sounds good. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes. Don't feel shy or afraid to sit closer to help facilitate discussion during the Q&A. afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our Manhattan College School of Business seminar. Does a Lasallian College need more ethics? Brendan Pastor says yes, where we begin a Manhattan College community-wide dialogue about having our School of Business become a signatory of the United Nations Principles for Responsible Management Education, or PRME, initiative. This event is also being live streamed, so welcome to those of you who are watching from around the country, perhaps the world. And I encourage you all to converse amongst yourselves online via Twitter. There's our handle up there, #PRME. This talk will also be recorded and housed on our Manhattan College School of Business YouTube channel, where you can see other great speakers and School of Business faculty present. So, before I introduce our speaker, I just have a few questions for you, and don't worry, I'm also going to give you the answers. So first question, would you say that part of our purpose here at Manhattan College involves preparing our students and graduates to be future generators of sustainable value for business and society, and to work toward an inclusive and sustainable global economy? You'd likely answer yes, and might point out that this is related to our values of providing a quality education and also an inclusive community. What about our values? Would you say that we value global social responsibility, such as that which is portrayed in international initiatives such as the United Nations Social Developmental Goals? In answering this, you might say yes. Here we have a concern for and feel solidarity with the poor and are deeply concerned about social justice. And then how about some of our methods that we use to accomplish these goals? Do we create an environment that enables effective learning experiences for responsible leadership? Well, you'd have to say yes. We provide many such experiences, one example being our Ministry in Social Action Lasallian Outreach Volunteer Experience or Love Trips. We also provide valuable learning experiences via Fair Trade and take pride in being the first Fair Trade certified college in New York City and 5th in the nation. This is the culmination of efforts, by the way, of Manhattan College students who were inspired by a love trip. Our methods also include new faculty development in our College Core Identity seminars, led by the Office of Mission and Brother Jack Curran, where we are guided on how to incorporate Lasallian values in our teaching in an inclusive manner, showing our value of faith in the presence of God and respect for all. And then, what about research here? Do we conduct research that advances our understanding about the role of corporations in the creation of sustainable social, environmental, and economic value? Yes. Walk into a Manhattan College business class, you will likely hear discussions among faculty students about triple bottom line, planet, people, and profit. Relatedly, you may think of faculty research, such as our own School of Business, Doctors Aurora and Rovenport, and their article outlining the importance of business leaders adopting a language that puts people and planet on equal footing with profit. You could also think of our Jasper Summer Research Scholars Program, where students have been inspired to conduct research on topics such as the contributions of Catholic worker Dorothy Day and the development of worker-owned cooperatives. And what of partnership? Do we partner with leaders of local organizations to understand their challenges and advance the collaborative effort of our goals? Yes. In fact, just last semester, I attended one of our community partners summits where faculty met with leaders of local organizations to have a dialogue about potential partnerships for community-based learning opportunities for our students. Finally, do we support a dialogue and debate among stakeholders on critical issues related to triple bottom line? Yes, absolutely. You see this dialogue fostered via teaching and research and campus activities such as this month's wonderful events for Black History Month, organized by the Multicultural Center, our Peace Week, which we just wrapped up with an interfaith prayer gathering, or next month's Women's History Month events, including a women's conference sponsored by the Women and Gender Studies programs. And this dialogue is also reflected in the multidisciplinary support for this talk. And the co-sponsors include Beta Alpha Psi, an international honor organization for financial information students and professionals that encourages a sense of ethical, social, and public responsibility. Other co-sponsors include Campus Ministry and Social Action, the Manhattan College Multicultural Center, MSA, the Muslim Student Association, Peace Studies, Women and Gender Studies, and Modern Languages and Literatures. So it just so happens that these questions that I posited to you directly correspond to the 6 principles of PRIME. Now, a January 2018 article in The Economist entitled "Management and Ethics, Greed is No Longer Good." In this article, the president of North America PRIME chapter, Dr. Barkamini, stated, "A strong grounding in ethical business practice is a job market differentiator." At Lasallian Business Schools, we know that. We're ahead of the game there. This begs the question, should we have our business schools become a signatory of the PRIME initiative? Does a Lasallian College need more ethics? Fortunately, we have Mr. Brendan Pastor here to explain. At the United Nations, he is responsible for all internal and external communications and relationship management with over 700 PRIME signatories. Previously, he's done impressive work in reporting on multi-stakeholder negotiations for the SDG goals, and just recently spoke at a United Nations event at Fordham on SDGs with our own Dr. Pamela Chasik. I asked Brendan what motivates him to get up every day, and he said his alarm clock, which he strategically places far from his bed so he has to get up. But he said, more importantly, quote, "I get to see such great things happening in schools and institutions around the world every day in my job, and that little bit of inspiration is what drives me to seek out new innovations from places I might least expect to find it." So with that, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Brendan Pastor.
Thanks everybody. Thank you, Jolie, for that great introduction, and to everyone at the school for organizing this. I am very sorry for keeping you inside when it's 75 degrees and sunny out, but I promise I'll try to make the most of the time, and will do my best to keep everybody engaged. What I'd like to do is just give a general introduction to PRIME, what we are, what we do, and why we do it, and then of course leave plenty of room towards the end for questions, and I'll hopefully answer any that you may have. Thank you. I could probably open up the PowerPoint.
Thanks, PowerPoint, for crashing.
All right, so as was very kindly introduced, PRIME, Principles for Responsible Management Education, is Manhattan College and the School of Business a great candidate for PRIME? Well, the answer based on that introduction is obviously yes. I actually have found, I've done lots of presentations, and increasingly more towards faith-based schools, so Catholic schools, Jesuit schools, some actually schools, I haven't gone to them, but I've done virtual presentations to schools in the Middle East, and I find that schools that are grounded with faith-based values are ahead of the game already when it comes to teaching ethics, sustainability, and social responsibility. This is, as you quoted for Dr. Mark Meany, an essential part of becoming a leader in the 21st century. It's a competitive advantage that, and I quote, I'm not allowed to say who or what organization, there was a Chatham House Rules meeting, but the CEO of, let's say, one of the largest management consultancy firms said he's not going to hire MBAs from Harvard anymore. He's not going to hire Yale grad school students anymore, specifically because they don't learn about these values. They therefore enter the workforce and don't understand these basic concepts. Whereas a lot of these new schools now, especially ones that are grounded in important values like ethics, are ready to start developing new solutions, new products, and new services fit for the 21st century. So, we'll cycle back a little bit, and hopefully this isn't too much repetitive for Pam, who was on a great panel we had last week at Fordham. In the 1950s, a famous economist, Milton Friedman, took out a full-page ad in the New York Times. In it, he said, business has one responsibility: to maximize profit, to deliver shareholder value. This is, in many ways, the framework for how business operated for most of the 20th century. And it was, in many ways, also a cover for business irresponsibility. Remember the days when your shoes were made by 8-year-old children in Malaysia, when Enron scandals were happening left and right. Companies were dumping toxic chemicals in the Hudson River. Why? Because they could. There was no reason not to. Business philosophy at the time said, this is what you're supposed to do. As long as your shareholders and your executives are happy, you don't need to change anything. At the same time as Friedman's New York Times article, 2 hippies in Vermont were doing what most people in Vermont do, and decided that they wanted to start an ice cream company. Obviously, they geared very differently and had very different values, is what Milton Friedman said. They thought their business could actually function for social purpose, that it could actually be a force for good. It could ultimately change others in the industry and help drive a movement. Now, Ben & Jerry was a rare example of a company at the time that was already ahead of the game, but they were at the very, very beginning of a movement that is overtaking business philosophy in the 21st century. This trend over the last 5 decades means that it's now almost unthinkable that your shoes will be made by underage children. It's almost unthinkable that a company can behave in a way that is polluting public resources like waterways and forests. Think of it this way: where are you going to buy shoes if you know that it's made by children in Malaysia? Are you going to bank with a company that sells firearms to gangs in Mexico? Probably not. We're part of a generation that sees these important concepts and are removing them from our daily lives. The problem is we need that to happen faster. It's not happening quick enough that there's a big enough transformation happening, but it's starting to. So, around the time of the global financial crisis 10 years ago, which already feels like decades ago when you really think about it, even though we're still feeling the consequences of it today, fingers were being pointed all over. Whose fault is it? Who caused the meltdown? Why were these executives giving out subprime loans to people who didn't deserve it? Why did those people get those loans in the first place? Is the government at fault? Are the consumers at fault? It's easy to point blame. It's a lot harder to identify the solution and to ensure that it never happens again. So a bunch of forward-thinking deans, UN leaders, and business executives got together and said, let's go to the very heart of it. Let's go to how we teach business. Let's change what students learn so that instead of seeing the need for only maximizing profit, that they actually realize business can be a force for good and in fact has a responsibility to society to support it. Why do we care? Why is it important to look at factors that promote social, economic, environmental development? If you've heard of the concept of sustainable development, it's relatively new in the grand scheme of things, but it's in many ways become the dominant paradigm for how we organize growth in the world. If you look on this chart, if you've heard of the Human Development Index before, this is a way to measure how, quote unquote, advanced a country is. So instead of just looking at GDP and the economic performance of a country, it includes factors like literacy, mortality rates, social inclusion, and a whole bunch of other factors. As you see on a scale of 0 to 1, the further to 1 that you are, the more developed or advanced your country is. The problem is, on this graph you see, is also on the y-axis, is carbon footprint. As a country becomes more advanced, it has a much more negative impact on the planet. That square, that rectangle in the blue at the bottom right, is what we need to ensure sustainable development, to ensure that future generations have the same access to what we have today without compromising the planet. Clearly, no country falls in that box. This is a significant problem. As all those yellow dots, which are Africa, there's some Middle East, Central Asia in there as well, and a few other areas, as they become more advanced, they're going to really impact their environment. And it's going to have a really bad impact. But we have a roadmap. We have a way to identify what can be done to ensure sustainable development happens. These are the Sustainable Development Goals. Fortunately, you have an absolute expert on these in the room, Pam, who also, as I learned on Thursday, it has a book out as well talking about what the SDGs are and sort of the process that went into creating them. I won't go into too much detail in the interest of time. Needless to say, these 17 goals, which we also call the global goals, are identifying the 17 challenges and within it many different targets and indicators that if we meet them by the year 2030, we're guaranteed a much more sustainable planet. What's unique about the SDGs is that unlike most other UN processes, was that this was a multi-stakeholder collaboration. There was input not just from governments and UN agencies, but most importantly to me, businesses. For the first time, they were invited to the table to discuss what is it that the world needs? What can we provide? What can the business community provide in helping to ensure these 17 SDGs are met? That's essential because let's face it, our daily lives are dominated by the private sector. We have much more interaction with private companies than we do with governments or civil society organizations. It's therefore essential that companies jump on board and understand that the SDGs are essential components of business strategy. This is the foundation of Prime now. Even though we're 10 years old, we've shifted over the last 3 years to ensuring that our mission is about advancing the Sustainable Development Goals in business and management education. Mind you, it's not just business and management schools. You can have Duke School of the Environment has joined Prime recently, engineering schools, science, math programs, largely because students that graduate from these schools will join companies. They'll be managers. They'll start their own businesses. And they're going to need to understand that certain values like sustainability and ethics are going to dominate their future lives. So the Secretary General of the United Nations recently identified Prime as a key resource to help change management and business education. That's in our DNA. We're a voluntary initiative, as you see on this over here. It's about 700 schools operating in 86 countries. What is it that we do? Well, at our core, we're trying to change the way that business and management education is taught, leveraging the resources that are already within schools, such as Lasallian values, to ensure that the business programs can integrate these concepts into their teaching, into their research, and their thought leadership, as well as, more importantly now, the SDGs, ensuring that today's business students understand what the 17 goals are, why they matter, and why embracing them early on will give you the competitive advantage in future careers. These 6 principles of Prime, you can see them on these 2 slides here, offer a framework, a roadmap to seek that transformation within the academic programs, but also the campus activities. So something like purpose. We understand that your purpose is to generate leaders of the future, whether it's a business leader or government leader, in a way that they can benefit society at large. How about the school's mission statement? Does the school's mission statement reflect the need to not just create students that are going to make a ton of money, but rather that they're going to have a social impact on the world? That's an example of a way that the school, by joining Prime, can sometimes, you can see a transformation taking place. Values, method, experiential learning. I learned that some students from the school went to India recently and travel around the world to see examples of social enterprises. Here's an example of a method to change how business is being taught. Instead of just reading old textbooks by people like Milton Friedman, who have a very misguided view of the world, seeing on the ground what's being done and how students can learn and interact with their communities. Increasingly important is research. Let's face it, the majority of research publications in business journals in many ways relate to sustainability. What is the purpose of business in the 21st century? You said the triple bottom line. This has become one of those common words to describe what a business's responsibility is now. It's now gone a lot further. Think of things like the Me Too movement. These have become embedded now into a lot of business school programs. The New York Times had an article recently discussing how some of the top MBA programs in the world now explain, suddenly out of nowhere, the importance of addressing gender issues in business studies. This is driven in many ways by social movements taking place on the ground, but largely reflect what we already know to be important. quickly, I'll just go over sort of how Prime works. Is, I said before, a voluntary initiative, mostly of business and management schools. One of the key dynamics that we have are our chapters. We have 14 chapters, kind of 15, I think we're only down to 14 now, that engage schools at the local and regional level, allow collaboration between schools and departments, joint research projects between faculty at the universities, even joint programs. I'll look, for example, at the Nordic chapter, which is Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Iceland, and Denmark. During the migration crisis, it's still actually ongoing around the world, but it really came to its head in 2015 and 2016. We put out a call to all of our schools. There's a global migration crisis. How are you going to help? What are the ways that the schools themselves can actually have a positive impact? What do? Faculty went to refugee camps. They taught a lot of people, young kids, also adults, about business in the new countries that they're resettling. They help provide free experience and understanding about how to start a business in these new countries. These are very simple examples, but they're really impactful examples when you take these important values and apply it at an institutional level. We also have working groups. We actually have 8 working groups, one of which is not on there as I see right now. They're related in many ways to the SDGs, but they go a lot farther, and they're really cross-cutting issues. Take like poverty working group, understanding businesses' role in eradicating poverty. Same for gender equality, I said before. Even broad concepts like a sustainability mindset. You'll hear this a lot more when you continue your business studies and you kind of go into programs that promote employment. A sustainability mindset is this very broad concept about how you're supposed to think of yourself as a business leader. These are great ways, and I understand there's some faculty in the room, that there's a research focus here. There's a clear advantage to ensure that your school is committing itself to some of these values and really becoming a leader on it. I said before again, I'm going to reiterate it. Harvard, NYU, they have name recognition, and sure, they teach ethics in some of their courses, but it doesn't dominate how they function. They're not leaders in these fields. It's all these new schools that are popping up in developing countries. India and China have new business schools starting up each week, and they're starting from the get-go, understanding the need to integrate these important values. Lasallian values are a prime example of a framework that allow you to understand these important concepts. But it's not just a bunch of white-collar bureaucrats in the United Nations telling us why these are important, why it's essential for business schools to transform. It's driven largely by student demand. We commission a survey every few years of business school students around the world. What do you want? What do you care about? Overwhelmingly, and in increasing numbers, you see that they're wanting more focus on sustainability, on ethics. They want to work for companies that are socially responsible. They believe that their schools should do more for their local community to ensure that there's more sustainability. I see this one, I couldn't find the exact, I still try to find it, I can't find the exact statistic. I think it's like 80% of students say that they'll take a pay cut if it means working at a company that aligns with their values. Some of us have student loans that we're going to have to pay off, so it's really becomes a little bit questionable. And I keep joking, if Goldman Sachs offered me a 6-figure salary, it'd be really difficult to say no. But at least now what we can say is you can really find jobs that are committed and you can align them with your own values. The other side of demand that's driving change in business schools is actually from businesses themselves. I use the example of Unilever a lot because Unilever is a major global company. They have products and services on almost every continent. Their headquarters is right across the river in Englewood, New Jersey, Englewood Cliffs. The CEO of Unilever says the old business model that they had in place is no longer valid. It's not going to deliver shareholder value anymore. Their focus now is on social impact. That's what's driving the company. Therefore, they're going to hire talent, students who come from schools that understand this concept. Overwhelmingly now, my prime initiative of the United Nations Global Compact, which is a corporate sustainability initiative. It's got about 12,000 signatories, about 10,000 businesses around the world join it, and they align with 10 principles, whereas Prime has 6. They have 10, focusing on things like eradicating slavery, child labor in supply chains, ensuring transparency, anti-corruption policies, respect for human rights and the environment, etc. These are governing principles that are integrated into business operations. So therefore, it's essential that when today's students join those companies, they not only understand human rights, the environment, but also opportunities that are afforded with the SDGs. One of the things we hear from students a lot is, yeah, this is all really important. I care a lot about sustainability. I care about the planet, but I also want to make money. I mean, let's face it, you didn't join this because you're looking at a lost industry. The private sector is focused on growth. What's becoming amazingly clear now is that you can have a business, making profit, while still delivering great impact on communities. This is called Lucky Iron Fish. It's literally just an iron ingot that is, in its own way, a social enterprise, but also addressing several of the SDGs. Students from the University of Guelph in Canada went to Cambodia. They discovered that iron deficiency is chronic there. And it's a global problem as well. 3.5 billion people suffer from iron deficiency, which means you don't have enough iron in your diet. This leads to a lot of health and development issues later on. It's really challenging for young children in developing countries who might not have access to the same levels of iron that we have in our diets. So what do? They invented a product. You boil this in a pot of water, and after about like 10 minutes or so, it already satisfies your body's daily need of iron. It's a B Corp. It's a profitable company. It's been featured in the New York Times, several business publications, Financial Times, all because they wanted to address a global challenge. And they did it through a private sector solution. There are plenty of examples out there of businesses that do this. Up the street in Yonkers, have you guys heard of Grayston Bakery? If you've learned about Grayston Bakery, you'll be absolutely, like, I was blown away when I learned. I'm from Westchester my whole life. I always knew it was there. I kind of knew that they had a social impact. They were a social enterprise, but I didn't really know the value of it. If you go into Yonkers, which I'm sure some of you must have, it's a very depressed community. There's a lot of poverty, homelessness, drug addiction. So these guys created a bakery. What's their policy? It's called open hiring. They hire people with no questions asked. No criminal background checks, no need for previous education experience. If you want a job, you'll get a job. In that job, they don't just pay you to work on the factory floor and then you go home at night. They support you. They provide you education. Do you need a home? They'll provide you a home. Do you need childcare services so you can work while your child are going to school or taken care of? They provide that as well. This is, again, a profitable company. This is Ben & Jerry's supplier of brownies. We've all had, what's the brownie? The fudge brownie one from Ben & Jerry's? Is it Chunky Monkey?
Like half-baked.
Half-baked, yeah.
Cookie. Isn't that cookie?
That's cookie, yeah. Whatever, they provide all the brownies and a lot of the cookies to Ben & Jerry's. This is a major company, it's growing. They're expanding now into Europe as well, all because they wanted to address a social challenge. This wasn't driven by charity, this was driven by a clear understanding of values, why those values matter, and knowing that business can be a driver of those values. And therefore, business schools themselves are the key incubators for ensuring that leaders of the 21st century are ready to take on these challenges, to solve the SDGs, whether it means starting your own business or joining an existing company with an idea that's going to have a transformational impact on communities. This is where it starts. I'm very happy to see such level of embedded values already in the school, and I really think this could grow further, whether it's through collaboration with other schools. I know there's other Lasallian schools, Jesuit schools as well, not just in the US, but globally, and that's why I think in many ways, Manhattan College is a prime candidate for prime. So I don't want to go on too far, so I'll cut it here, and if anyone has any questions, by all means, feel free to ask whether it's related to Prime, Global Compact, the UN, or really anything as well. So, thank you very much.
So we've heard some nice words about how this could be beneficial to Manhattan College, some research and networking opportunities, and enhanced visibility, and enhancing our visibility as a leader in perpetuating these values that are so important when informed by business, as Brendan pointed out. So do we have any questions for him? And I will bring the microphone to you, so to make sure everyone can hear you.
Hello. In your experience, do you see social change and the implementation of the SDGs by like federal governments or more on like grassroots initiatives? Like, is there a better like solution?
It's global.
Global.
It was developed with a multi-stakeholder capacity, and it's owned by all stakeholders: governments, businesses, civil society groups, local churches, individuals themselves. Every year they review the progress on the SDGs. Usually they dedicate just about 5 or 6 of them each year to understand what's being done. Some governments are above and beyond. Some haven't even begun to integrate the SDGs into their national planning yet. Same goes for businesses. Some businesses have the SDGs on their homepage. PepsiCo is an example of a company that's really jumped on board very early with the SDGs because they see clear business benefits to it, but other companies don't. So it really goes at all different levels of society, and it's hard to say whether one is more important than the other because it's a global need. It's honestly, I don't like hyperbole very much, but this is, I think, the only chance we have to really systemically address a lot of the global challenges that we face. They're not perfect, the 17 goals, but they cover almost everything that we need. So that if all stakeholders do take them on board meaningfully and address, there's 17 goals, but there's 169 targets within them and several hundred more indicators to measure how well they're being done. If we all as a society really address them, we're going to have a better planet.
Thank you.
Other questions? This is one of our students, Dan.
So thanks for your presentation. I just had a question because you focused on management and well, students mainly, but after students go out to the world, how do you deal, for example, with corrupt governments and stuff like that, especially in implementing these companies or these ideas? I studied a couple semesters ago with Dr. Taneshi, and we went over a lot of the development goals and stuff like that. But one of the main issues was always, well, okay, we have these great ideas, but when you go to a country in Africa where the government is very unstable or they have a big corruption problem, how do you implement these ideas?
Not easily. I think our mandate is to focus on the academic institutions. So if we can see there's about 16,000 business schools in the world. If all 16,000 of them are teaching the SDGs, we'll accomplish our mission. But you're right, the job's not done. Eventually they'll go into businesses or in governments, and it's their responsibility to embrace what they learned in education and academics and bring that forth with them for their career. There are other mechanisms for supporting this, not to mention just the millions of civil society organizations around the world that are working to advance the SDGs on the ground, especially so in developing countries. They're working hand in hand with governments. But you're right, there's going to be cases where corruption is systemic, and just accepting the SDGs isn't going to solve it. So that's why, I said before that if we work on really embrace the SDGs, we'll solve all the worlds. I should change my statement. It's not a panacea. It's not going to fix everything, but that's kind of really the challenge of humanity. And that's something that the United Nations is working feverishly to try and address in many different ways. Transforming education, in my opinion, is probably step one. And that's what we're here to do.
Any other questions for Brendan?
This was fantastic. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask a follow-up from Dan. Picture. Sorry. I help the students run the fair trades business in the school business, and I really am passionate about that. I'm passionate about experiential learning and that. However, I have 4 children. I live in New York City, and I still need to buy my son's khakis at Children's Place. And I know that they are not fair trade, and they probably don't have good, I don't really know, but I'm assuming that they don't really have good things. So reality sets in. As much as I would like to buy fair trade everything, I can't afford that, or I choose not to afford that because I want to do other things. And I am passionate about fair trade. So A little bit about, I think it's the same as the corruption, and I think that this reminds me a lot of like when I was young with recycling. You know, the kids drew the parents into recycling. Like I remember my brother telling my mother, we gotta recycle it. And eventually, now my mom's like, oh, she's crazy about recycling. So she does it all the time. And I feel like the demand, if people stop buying stuff, I mean, it's, even though you quoted the guy about stockholders being important, stockholders were the demand back then. And they're the ones that decided, I want to invest in places that make a lot of money. And with educating students and the new students coming up, they have, like you said, they care more about the environment, they care more about sustainability. And so their demand is going to be different than the demand 20 years ago or in 2007, whenever so I think this is a great start. My concern is when you think about small businesses, when you think about people trying to start entrepreneurial, which is a very hot thing now, it's so, for me it feels like it's so expensive. And for those people, the failure rate for entrepreneurs is so high. Now you're going to put this other stuff, and unless we can create the demand, so I hope there's initiatives for like startups and entrepreneurs in the thing, and that was my question. Are there initiatives for those types of businesses?
Yeah, you touched a lot of really important points, and we live in a dichotomy. We have probably more information available to us than ever before, whether it's through social media, like the infinite access to all knowledge of mankind on this one device right here. Yet we still, and we also have our values. We know what we care about, yet we still, well, bottled water. I'm going to hide this behind me right now. So you're right.
You don't like coffee canister.
This laptop, yeah. I mean, even that laptop might have, Apple works really hard to ensure that their materials are sustainably sourced, but only a few years ago, exactly, a lot of their iPhones aren't made in great conditions in China. Some of the materials in laptops come from conflict zones, yet it's inevitable that we're still going to buy a Mac. So yeah, that when we face those challenges, and this is really not something that's going to be easily fixed. But when you say demand, you kind of point to the early stages of how we make that change. A company like Whole Foods never would have really existed 10, 15, 20 years ago. But then it popped up, suddenly there's one everywhere. It's competing now against big giants that are not changing their ways as much, but it's still having a market impact. It's a critical mass that we're seeing globally in its very early stages.
It's really early. Because
Very
my husband still calls Whole Foods full paycheck. Because you go in and it's more expensive. But now it's becoming more popular. Yeah.
What was it? Bezos bought Whole Foods for $4 billion, and I feel like I've spent $4 billion at Whole Foods. So.
I don't know if you're all familiar with an organization called Fairphone. Fairphone, and you can make an impact by looking up information about them, following them on Twitter. They really make a concerted effort to have a clean supply chain in building their cell phones. They're only available in Europe. So for years I've been tweeting at them and emailing them, like, when are you gonna make it available in the USA? So currently, they're at a point where they're having a hard time keeping up with demand, and there's a wait list that they're trying to grow and get resources, but it's challenging when you're trying to be ethical as well. But I appreciate the points that you brought up. Other questions, comments?
I have a question and a comment. First, in terms of the question is, how can Manhattan College become a prime member? What do we need to do? And the second, for those of you who are interested in this, in the fall I will be teaching environmental politics, government 223, and each time we teach it, we do a project on campus. Last time we looked at how we can implement some of the SDGs on our campus community, and we'll be doing a similar project. And I've had many students from the School of Business in that class. So if you're looking for a cool elective that will help you to implement them, Government 223 will be offered in the fall. But how do we join?
Well, to that first question, yeah, it's quite simple. It's just on our website as a sign-up form. And email me with any questions that you have and ideas for how to engage. And I'm there to help facilitate, whether it's students asking questions, faculty, administrators, researchers, etc. But yeah, to the course point, and also building onto your question as well, is the idea that you can't separate business from government. You can't separate environment from business. And so there's a lot of a multidisciplinary movement to change how we learn about some of these subjects. And one of the key outcomes that we identify is that there's oftentimes political solutions to some of these business and social challenges. So going back to sort of the idea about why don't we buy more fair trade? We could, or we can build a movement to force companies to change, or we can create laws that will require it. There's many different avenues where we see it taking place in different areas of the world with differing levels of success. But I think understanding that when you learn about business and you learn about these great solutions to feel better, feeling good about being able to buy a phone that's sustainably sourced, or supporting a social enterprise that's having a positive impact, these are political choices that we make. And again, it goes back to the idea that it's aligning with your values, and if those values continue to grow, it's going to create, in my opinion, a larger wave that will force more change.
I have a follow-up question, because it's one thing to sign up for Prime, and it's another to collect the data and go through the annual reporting that would be required to maintain that. Can you comment on that process a little bit?
Yes, we are very aware that there are a multitude of accreditation bodies out there. AACSB, EFMD, AMBA, all these things. Plus then when you want to do rankings for FT, The Economist, US News World Report, it's very taxing on faculty and administrators to do all that. We try with Prime, it's every 24 months, every 2 years. It's the only requirement to being a signatory. You have to communicate what you're doing. Identify how the 6 principles are being implemented at your school through teaching, through research, etc. And this either takes the form of a Word document with bullet points, or 80-page publications. But it's important to see these not just as like an obligation in order to maintain participation. This is a communication to stakeholders. This is intended to be your communication to future students, to sponsors, that you are trying to make a change at the school. This document proves it. You can set yourself up as sustainability leaders in the quality of the document that you have. And in many cases, because we were founded by a lot of these accreditation bodies, AACSB, FMD, the biggest ones, they will use the Prime, we call it a SIP report, sharing information on progress. They accept those as qualifications for demonstrating leadership at the school. EFMD in particular, it's more European focused, but they're growing in the US now, will accept that one of the requirements is that you have to have ethical purpose in your business school. Submitting that Prime SIP report is validation for them in most cases. So we try and build bridges between our reporting requirements and those of other institutions. Excitingly, I will also quickly say, we had an event in Davos during the World Economic Forum this past January. And there were the deans from the top schools in the world in attendance, a lot of corporate executives, and UN leaders. We've agreed, and we've now been mandated to suggest and really lobby for changes in school rankings to ensure that values like sustainability are integrated into the rankings. This is going to have, if this happens, and we've already been in touch with the Financial Times about this, if you can start measuring the school's commitment to sustainability and some of these important values, suddenly you're going to see significant changes in those annual top 100 rankings. Suddenly schools that are like INCAE in Costa Rica, it's still one of the top 100 MBA programs in the world. I think they're maybe 10th or between 10 and 20, depending on the ranking. They're so focused on sustainability and social impact that if that was integrated into the FT rankings more, theoretically they could jump up a lot higher. And we don't like the word rankings in Prime because you don't measure a school's commitment based on where they land on a chart. But let's be honest, it's quite important for the schools to get our own recognition, for it to gain visibility. So that's we're in the early stages of that, but that's how we try and create value, and sort of part of our value proposition is that we're trying to not just change the schools internally and allow them to flourish, but also change the global community for schools.
Great. That was some valuable, actionable information there. Any other questions? Okay. I'll make sure you're heard.
Is there a goal that's most important? I mean, there's like sometimes we talk
Yeah, we had this question at Fordham, and my answer is usually they're all so important. It's hard to pick one, but I do have preferences. Personally, I'm a labor union guy. My background is academically studying the labor movement globally, so the SDG 8, which relates to decent work, is quite important to me. I think my line is always that, you know, we spend more of our lives in our careers than we do with our families or doing things that we love. So it's essential in that our work life is protected. I mean, I'm sure nobody's going to deny that, right? You want to ensure that you're paid well, that you're safe in your job, that you have the same kind of benefits and opportunities as other coworkers, that your gender or your race or your religion isn't going to prevent that. So that's why I quite like SDG 8. I think it's a very radical goal compared to some of the other ones which are a little bit more obvious, you know, ensuring gender equality, of course. But saying specifically that workers and the work life is essential to ensuring that sustainable development happens was, I thought, a really radical choice. But on the fact of prioritizing one goal over another, sure. Afghanistan doesn't care about the ocean goal. They're a landlocked country. They don't even touch the ocean. So why are they going to put their resources into it? They won't. They're going to care about the goals related to peace and security, stable institutions, gender equality. And that's what we find with countries. They will identify the goal that's most important to them, or at least maybe where they're kind of lacking and have the least progress. And that's where they would be putting all of their efforts. In the US, I think the goal that was identified was on inequalities. Reducing inequalities and climate action were the two preferred goals for the United States government. I mean, that was when Obama was president, so I'm not sure what the priorities are for the current government, or even if they know what the SDGs are. But the society, you know, American society is at least very aware of those important goals.
Any other questions? I just have one point on related to decent work. I talked to my students recently about a terrible tragedy regarding concepts of decent work and the drivers in our city whose wages have been driven down by Uber and Lyft. And we had a very sad tragedy with a man named Mr. Doug Shifter, who had been working for decades and at one point could make a living wage and support his family driving a cab. But eventually things got to the point where he was having to work 100 plus hours a week and still going into debt and not being able to feed his family. And sadly, he wrote a Facebook post saying that he didn't want to live like this anymore. He would prefer to die rather than work for chump change and live like an enslaved person. And then he, a few weeks ago, went down in front of City Hall and committed suicide and shot himself in the head. And in his Facebook post, he had said he wanted his death to be a rallying cry to draw attention to this issue. There is an organization called the New York City Taxi Workers Alliance who've been working for decades to try to support these workers. And I said to my students, like, let's look for, who's looking at this like an entrepreneur and leveraging this situation and providing something good out of it. And so the voters in Austin actually voted for Uber and Lyft to leave their city because part of the reason is because they didn't do background checks. And they said, we don't want companies like that. In that wake of Uber and Lyft leaving Austin, Texas, 3 companies emerged that managed to make a profit and provide affordable fares for driving and pay their drivers a living wage. The Governor Abbott of Texas overrode the will of the voters and signed legislation that forced Austin, Texas to let Uber and Lyft back in. 2 of the companies are no longer there, but Ride Austin is still there. Ride Austin is a nonprofit. They're having a hard time trying to keep up their volume now that Uber and Lyft are there, but they're still there, and they're a nonprofit, and they're trying to differentiate themselves with ethics, and they recently were giving free rides for people to the local hospital. So I think that's maybe a nice positive note to end on and can inspire us to look at what can we do here in New York City and our own community to support, give decent work to these very hardworking people. So, well, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank all of you for attending.
Thank you very much.